Alberta's independence fight is no longer just background noise. It is roaring louder than ever, shaking the very foundation of this country. And here is the shocking part. It is not just Alberta anymore. Even the Yukon, way up north, Canada's forgotten frontier, is starting to ask the same hard questions. Why stay in a country that bleeds you dry, that drains you of resources, while giving absolutely nothing back? When the Yukon, one of the most remote territories in this entire federation, starts whispering those words, you know that Ottawa has failed completely. Look at what happened just last week. The Yukon government launched its very first health authority. 7 people were appointed to sit on the board of the Schwaha Health and Wellness Center, Yukon. That is a historic first, but let's not sugarcoat why it happened. It is not because Ottawa suddenly decided to care. It is because Yukoners were left no choice. Life in the Yukon is brutal, and not just because of the weather. It is because the cost of living is absolutely crushing. Rent is sky high. Utilities are through the roof. Families are scraping by while Ottawa shrugs, pretends nothing's wrong, and pockets the money. Try renting a house in one of the most remote corners of the country. You're looking at $2,000 a month, and that is before you even count the heating costs that eat families alive every winter. Does Ottawa care? No. Ottawa shrugs. The healthcare system. Do not even get me started. Specialists have to be flown in from thousands of kilometers away. Appointments get delayed for months. Some residents will not even bother seeking care anymore because they know what they're going to face. Systemic racism, disrespect, total neglect, and Ottawa does not fix it. Ottawa ignores it. So what happens? Yukoners build their own health authority because the so-called national government abandoned them completely. That says it all. You only start taking healthcare into your own hands when you realize that Ottawa has left you for dead. This new authority is not just a bureaucracy. It is a collaboration with Yukon First Nations. Tackling systemic racism, cultural safety, and inclusive care, it is an act of survival because jobs in the Yukon are seasonal, unstable, and scarce. Agriculture collapses in the cold. Construction shuts down in the snow. Young people leave because there is nothing to keep them there. Entire communities are hollowing out while Ottawa grabs every cent of resource revenue and spends it thousands of kilometers away. That is theft. That is neglect. And people wonder why Yukoners are starting to talk about sovereignty, about joining Alberta and Saskatchewan in a push for independence. You think it is a joke? Not anymore. If you are forced to live with collapsing healthcare, impossible costs, and zero opportunity while Ottawa hoards your wealth, how long before you start saying enough? How long before you stop whispering and start shouting? Now let's go back to Alberta, because the clock is ticking. Premier Danielle Smith handed Ottawa a list of 12 demands, not polite requests, not little suggestions, non-negotiable ultimatums. Repeal Bill C-69, lift the tanker ban, scrap the oil and gas emissions cap, end the net zero car mandate, restore provincial control of the carbon tax, guarantee export corridors, and the list goes on. This was the line in the sand. Smith said it loud and clear. Ottawa had 6 months to act, 6 months to show respect, 6 months to treat Alberta like the powerhouse that it is. Guess what? 5 of those months are gone, and Ottawa has not moved an inch. Not a single repeal, not a single concession, not a shred of progress. Just the same stall tactics, hoping that Albertans will get tired, roll over, and back down. But Albertans are not backing down. This time is different. Independence talk is not rumor anymore. It is organized, it is legal, it is binding, and it is shaking the ground under Confederation. Alberta's revolt is not coming someday. It is coming now, and Ottawa has no idea what is about to hit them. Let's talk numbers, because the numbers are devastating. The petition threshold used to be nearly impossible, 640,000 signatures, but now slashed to 177,000. That is manageable, that is realistic. And organizers are already bragging that they have more than 240,000 pledges. Do you understand what that means? The vote is not a what if, the vote is a when. That ballot is coming, period, end of discussion. Danielle Smith herself said it best. The damage Alberta has suffered over the last decade has come from bad federal policy. The Liberal NDP alliance targeted Alberta's industry with punitive policies designed to keep oil and gas in the ground. Keystone XL killed, Energy East script, Northern Gateway vetoed, billions of dollars in opportunities torched by Ottawa's arrogance. How many betrayals does it take before a province finally flips the table? Alberta's breaking point has arrived, and here's the kicker. Danielle Smith admitted that the government cannot stop a citizen-led push in. If Albertans sign, Albertans will vote. And when that day comes, Ottawa will have no legal excuse left. This is not about anger anymore. This is about survival. Alberta has finally said enough. For decades, the West has been abused. Taken for granted, drained dry. And yet, when Quebec announces a surplus, they still have the nerve to reject Alberta's pipelines and oil. Imagine the hypocrisy the very next day. Ottawa bends over backward to please Quebec while Alberta bleeds. Now let's call this what it really is. Theft. Generational, systematic theft. Every single year, Ottawa drains $20 to $22 billion out of Alberta's economy. Do the math. That is $5,000 stolen from every single Albertan every year. Families, seniors, kids, everyone is fleeced for that amount. Over the last 50 years, more than $600 billion siphoned east. Think about that number. $600 billion? Do you know what Alberta could have built with that money? Entire new hospital systems, modern schools in every single city, infrastructure that would rival any nation on earth, taxes slashed, small businesses supercharged, hard work rewarded instead of punished. But instead, that money is gone. And where did it go? Straight into buying votes for the Liberal Party in Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. That is the ugly truth. Your taxes are not serving you. They are buying political power for Ottawa. Let's break it down even further, because this is not just equalization. Bill C-69, the so-called No More Pipelines law, was engineered specifically to choke Alberta's energy sector to death. Federal carbon taxes pile costs on families and businesses every single year. Endless vetoes from Ottawa have crushed projects worth more than $500 billion. $500 billion in lost opportunities, in stolen futures, because Ottawa prefers to keep Alberta locked in a straitjacket instead of letting it thrive on its own terms. Think about what has been stolen here. Every single year, $20 to $22 billion is ripped out of Alberta's economy to bankroll Ottawa's schemes. Over 40 or 50 years, that's more than $600 billion taken from the people of this province. That is not partnership. That is not confederation. That is exploitation. Pure and simple. Alberta has been treated like a piggy bank, shaken and robbed, and then told to shut up when it dares to complain. And here's the critical shift. People are waking up. They're no longer buying Ottawa's lies. They see exactly what is happening. And let's not pretend this anger is going to fade away. The October 1st deadline is not just a date on the calendar. It is the moment of truth. If Danielle Smith does not deliver consequences, if she fails to show teeth, she is going to lose the very people who still believe in her. Because patience is gone. The anger is raw. And the independence train has already left the station. Alberta holds a royal flush. It is the economic engine, the lifeline that makes confederation even possible. Ottawa, meanwhile, is bluffing with a pair of twos. For years, Alberta folded, accepted scraps, tolerated humiliation. But this time, the cards are on the table. The chips are in, and the choice is clear. Either Alberta goes all in, or it condemns itself to another generation of theft and betrayal. Let's be blunt. Alberta has been robbed blind for half a century. Ottawa's equalization scam has drained about $250,000 per person over that time. That's $250,000 ripped from the future of every man, woman, and child in this province. That money could have built world-class schools, affordable housing, thriving communities. Instead, what do Albertans get? Crumbling schools, sports facilities falling apart, small towns losing their young people because opportunity dries up the moment they graduate. And then they turn on the TV and see Quebec and Ontario gorging themselves on the cash Alberta produced, sneering at the oil industry that paid for their handouts. That is hypocrisy at the highest level. Ask a 25-year-old in Alberta today if they think Ottawa has their back. They will laugh in your face, because all they have ever seen is theft, betrayal, and humiliation. Ottawa does not see young Albertans as citizens. It sees them as wallets to be emptied. And that resentment is now political firepower. Once young people stop believing in the system itself begins to collapse. This is not only about economics. This is cultural. Alberta, Saskatchewan, the Yukon, they stand for faith, family, freedom, grit, and self-reliance. Ottawa stands for bureaucracy, entitlement, and progressive dictates shoved down people's throats whether they like it or not. You cannot negotiate those values. Once politics becomes about culture, compromise is dead. That is when separation stops being a bargaining chip and becomes the only answer left on the table. Canada is not one nation anymore. It is two very different nations pretending to live under one flag. And the divorce papers are already being drafted. Look at history. Norway walked away from Sweden. Slovakia split from Czechoslovakia. Ireland broke free from the UK. Nations endure. Political unions die. Alberta is a nation. Canada is paperwork. Travel to a farm town in Saskatchewan or northern Alberta, and you will see people who survive by hard work, who pull wealth from the ground, whether it's oil, wheat, or uranium. Now contrast that with the Ottawa elites who sip lattes and lecture the West about climate change, all while cashing the very checks paid for by Western oil and gas. That is not partnership. That is cultural warfare. And do not forget the Yukon. Rural communities there are already struggling with high costs and collapsing healthcare. They live thousands of kilometers from Ottawa, but every decision that affects them is made as if they do not even exist. When Yukoners had to build their own health authority to fight systemic racism and collapsing services, where was Ottawa? Nowhere. Because Ottawa does not care about fixing problems. It only cares about controlling them. And that is why the so-called compromise myth is dead. You cannot bridge values that are this far apart. The West believes in independence. Ottawa believes in control. Once values diverge this much, negotiation is pointless. That is why separation is no longer a threat. It is the only realistic option left. This is Canada's Yugoslavia moment. To the outside world, it looks stable. But under the surface, debt, corruption, division, rage are all boiling. And just like Yugoslavia, one spark will be enough. October 1st, a referendum. Another federal insult. Pick your moment. But the explosion is coming. So when people ask whether separation is realistic, the answer is no. It is not realistic. It is inevitable. And the proof is everywhere. Alberta's petition has already passed the threshold. 240,000 pledges are in hand, far beyond what is needed. Saskatchewan's trigger is already in motion at 125,000 signatures. Premier Scott Moe has said flat out he will not block a referendum if the people demand it. That is a green light, and in the Yukon, the whispers are growing louder every day. Residents there are asking the exact same question Albertans started asking years ago. Why stay in a federation that only bleeds you dry? This is not fringe anymore. This is mainstream when farm towns, mining communities, and small cities are packing halls with organized campaigns, lawyers drafting roadmaps, petitions being readied for ballots. That is not rebellion talk. That is governance in waiting. Ottawa cannot stop this tide. Polls already show that 1/3 of Albertans are firmly ready to vote. Leave. Another third leaning that way. That is 2/3 of the province staring directly at the exit door. Saskatchewan hovers above 40% and climbing. Interior British Columbia is restless. The Yukon is tired. The West is united in frustration, and every time Ottawa tries to scare the West with threats of collapse, it only adds fuel to the fire. Taxes, vetoes, insults. None of it creates fear anymore. It just makes independence look even more attractive. When threats stop working, the movement becomes unstoppable. And that is exactly where we are right now. Look at the numbers again. Albertans pay in about $6,000 each year. And what do they get back? Nothing. Zero benefits. Meanwhile, Quebec, paying less into the system, gets $9,000 back in benefits. That is legalized theft. Call it what it is. And while Albertans are being squeezed dry, billions disappear into corruption, waste, and nepotism in Ottawa. Friends and family of the political class line their pockets while the West is told to shut up and keep paying. Canada is on life support, and the West is about to pull the plug if Alberta and Saskatchewan walk away. 75% of Canada's oil production disappears overnight. Equalization collapses. Billions stop flowing east. The Maritimes crumble financially. Quebec cannot survive without Alberta's money. Ontario will struggle. And the so-called national economy? Gone. The Yukon's revolt makes this even more serious. Because if even the most neglected and remote territory is sick of Ottawa, then it proves the sickness is not just in the prairies. It is across the entire map. History is crystal clear. Political unions collapse all the time. Norway broke away from Sweden. Slovakia left Czechoslovakia. Ireland separated from the UK. None of those nations disappeared. In fact, they became stronger once they were free from abusive unions. So why should Alberta, Saskatchewan, or the Yukon be any different? Nations endure. Bad unions die? Let's be absolutely blunt about what is happening here. Alberta does not cut a check directly to Quebec. No. The money goes to Ottawa first, gets mixed in with federal revenues, and then redistributed. But the origin is hidden, buried in the books, disguised so that people cannot see where it truly came from. In financial and legal circles, you know what that is called. Money laundering? Yes. Ottawa launders Alberta's money through the federal system, so no one can trace just how badly this province is being drained. The message could not be louder. Time is up. Negotiations are over. Either Ottawa respects sovereignty, or Canada fractures into history. And let's not fool ourselves. Ottawa has shown again and again that it will never change. It cannot change, so why waste another decade pretending Confederation was supposed to be a partnership? Instead, it has become an abusive relationship. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon pay all the bills. while being treated like unwanted tenants in their own home. And in every abusive relationship, the healthiest option is not to compromise more. It is to leave. This is Canada's Yugoslav moment. On the surface, it looks stable, but underneath, corruption, division, resentment, and rage are boiling over. One spark is all it will take. Maybe it is October 1st. Maybe it is another federal insult. Maybe it is yet another Ottawa veto killing a project worth billions. Pick your moment, but the spark is coming. And when it hits, the collapse will be swift. So when people still ask me if separation is realistic, I don't bother sugarcoating it. Realistic? No. It is inevitable. Because once the most productive provinces of this country realize they are stronger on their own, nothing can stop them. Alberta knows it. Saskatchewan knows it. Even the Yukon is starting to whisper it. The writing is on the wall. The West is not bluffing. The petitions are real. The signatures are there. The lawyers are ready. The ballots are waiting. This is not some angry rant in a coffee shop. This is an organized, legal, democratic movement that Ottawa cannot dismiss. And every insult from Ottawa, every arrogant shrug, every stolen dollar only makes the fire burn hotter. Look at the math one more time. Over 50 years, Ottawa's equalization racket has drained $600 billion from Alberta. That is $600 billion that could have built hospitals, schools, roads, power grids, entire modern cities. Instead, Alberta gets nothing while Quebec, Ontario, and the Atlantic provinces gorge themselves on the wealth that they did not earn. Imagine what Alberta could have done with that money. Imagine the jobs, the prosperity, the innovation. It was all stolen. That is not just bad policy. That is theft. That is betrayal. And now the younger generations are the ones paying the highest price. Try buying a house in Alberta at 25 years old. Good luck. Prices are insane. Wages are stagnant. And the energy sector is shackled by federal red tape. Ottawa's fingerprints are all over that disaster. Billions drained east while young Albertans are forced to delay families. Delay homes? Delay futures. Ottawa treats them not as citizens, but as ATMs. It is not only unjust, it is unsustainable. Resentment is no longer just frustration. It is a culture now. Entire generations in Alberta and Saskatchewan have grown up knowing that Ottawa is not their friend, not their partner, not their ally. They know Ottawa as the thief. They know Ottawa as the betrayer. And once an entire generation gives up on a system, that system collapses under its own weight. The polls prove it. 2/3 of Albertans are either ready or leaning toward leaving. Saskatchewan is pushing past 40% and climbing. Interior BC is restless. The Yukon is now openly talking about separation. This is not a fringe anymore. This is the mainstream. Ottawa cannot stop it because Ottawa created it. And here is the part Ottawa cannot comprehend. Every time they try to scare the West with threats, it backfires. Every time they lecture Albertans about climate change while cashing their oil checks, it fuels the fire. Every time they veto another pipeline or slap on another carbon tax, they push more people into the independence camp. Threats do not work anymore. Fear tactics do not work anymore. The West has already accepted that leaving is better than staying chained to Ottawa. Let's talk power hop. If Alberta and Saskatchewan leave, 3/4 of Canada's oil production disappears. Equalization collapses overnight. Billions stop flowing east. The Maritimes collapse financially. Quebec cannot survive without Alberta's money. Ontario will struggle without Alberta's resources. The so-called Canadian economy evaporates. Confederation cannot exist without the West. Ottawa knows it, but they gamble anyway, bluffing like always. And this is the delicious irony. The very provinces that insult Alberta's oil, calling it dirty, depend on it to fund their survival. They spit in Alberta's face while cashing Alberta's checks. That hypocrisy is no longer tolerated. That hypocrisy is the fuel of independence. So where does this all go? Toward the ballot box? Toward the petitions that have already blown past their thresholds? Toward October 1st, where Ottawa will finally face the consequences of decades of theft and neglect. Alberta has the power. Saskatchewan has the power. The Yukon is awakening to the same reality. Together, they hold the cards. Ottawa is out of bluffs. The West has one choice left. Stay in an abusive relationship and watch another generation be robbed blind. Or finally walk away. Finally build a nation that rewards hard work instead of punishing it. Finally control its own destiny. Enough waiting, enough excuses, enough theft. The time for independence is here. And when history is written, they will say this: Ottawa did not lose the West. Ottawa drove it away.